Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's good to see you. Thanks so much for coming to our deep dive at the Dialogue, Bridging Field Solutions, Policy and Investment, Sustainable Productivity Growth at the Water, Soil, Carbon Nexus, presented by the Global Agricultural Productivity Initiative at Virginia Tech. It's my pleasure to start out this event with some summaries from our 2025 GAP report. I'm Tom Thompson at Virginia Tech. I'm a professor of agronomy and soils. I'm associate dean in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. I lead our global unit called CALS Global and am executive editor of the Global Agricultural Productivity Report, or GAP report. This year's GAP report, and the GAP report, if you're not familiar, is an annual report. The 2025 GAP report is called the TFP Growth Frontier, Plateaus and Progress in Agricultural Productivity Growth. So I'm pleased to present a brief summary of some of our findings, but I do encourage you to read the entire report. There are copies available to you, and you can also download it from our website. The 2025 GAP report was launched on October 1st at a special event in Chicago. And then we had another launch last week in Rome at FAO's World Food Forum. And now we're very pleased to be here at the World Food Prize Borlaug Dialogue to once again share findings from our report with a new audience. I always like to start with a definition of what we mean by agricultural productivity. Simply put, agricultural productivity is a measure of how efficiently resources and inputs in agriculture are converted to outputs. So essentially, it is a measure of efficiency. Agricultural productivity growth, which we measure as total factor productivity, or TFP, increases either by generating more output with the same or fewer resources, or generating the same output with fewer resources and inputs. Productivity is not the same as production, it's not the same as yield, but again, it's a measure of efficiency. TFP rises when producers use innovative agricultural techniques and knowledge. And therefore, tracking changes in TFP reveals a great deal about agricultural systems. Agricultural output can be increased by the conversion of grasslands, forests, and wetlands to agricultural production. In fact, throughout most of human history, that's how we have increased agricultural output. We can also extend irrigation to already cultivated lands or intensify the use of inputs such as fertilizers, capital, labor, and others to increase output. Each of these strategies can be appropriate in given situations. However, in increasing TFP holds out hope of a more sustainable way to increase agricultural output. Input intensification in the orange bars, including increased application of fertilizers, crop protection products, and use of mechanization, was the most important driver of increased agricultural output during the 1960s and 70s. However, beginning in the 1980s, TFP growth became the leading contributor to agricultural output growth until the present day. During the 2000s, global TFP growth was almost 2% annually. Unfortunately, during the most recent decade for which we have data, 2014 to 23, average annual global TFP growth fell to 0.76% annually. This chart helps to illustrate the importance of TFP growth in agriculture. Since 1961, global agricultural output has increased fourfold, while input use has slightly more than doubled. The distance between the lines on this chart reflects the increased output that can be attributed to TFP growth in agriculture. The past decade's plateau in TFP growth underscores the scale of the global TFP growth challenge that now faces us. but it doesn't explain why growth has slowed nor how to reinvigorate it. To chart a path forward, we must better understand the forces driving and constraining productivity growth across different contexts. Sustainably and profitably maintaining output growth by limiting the growth of input use requires ongoing technological progress, innovation, improved practices, and better management. As adoption of an individual technology increases, it will eventually contribute less to productivity growth. Long-run TFP growth, therefore, depends not just on the diffusion of existing technologies, but also the continuous development of new ones. To illustrate this phenomenon, the 2025 GAP report introduces the TFP Growth Frontier Model, a novel conceptual model that visualizes overall long-run productivity growth achieved through a series of technological domains. It diagnoses these dynamics and guides strategic action to reinvigorate productivity growth. The model serves as a benchmark for measuring and comparing inefficiencies, adoption lags, and performance gaps, and illuminates opportunities to drive productivity progress within and across agricultural systems. Each domain frontier illustrates how the productivity growth ceiling changes over time. Eventually, growth slows or may even decline, as shown by the purple, orange, blue, and green lines on this chart. Together, these domain frontiers form the TFP growth frontier, the magenta outer envelope, which captures the long-run trajectory of productivity growth. These domains tend to overlap rather than follow a strict sequence or fully replacing earlier frontiers. The first domain to appear is extensification, in which new lands are brought into production, labor use expands, and basic inputs may be introduced. This domain is enabled by abundant arable land, low population density, and limited capital. This domain is still the main contributor to output growth in sub-Saharan Africa. The input intensification domain emerges in response to limited land availability and the environmental impact of expanding into new lands, coupled with rising agricultural demand and the need for producer profitability. The Green Revolution embodies the input intensification domain, introducing high-yielding varieties, synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and expanding irrigation. Third, the efficiency optimization domain arises as a response to the economic and environmental limitations of the input intensification domain. The core objective is advancing sustainable intensification by enhancing the efficiency of resource use, land, water, energy, and inputs, while maintaining or increasing output, minimizing environmental impact, and ensuring that farmers are profitable. Finally, we see a new domain emerging, which we will call systems integration. This domain is a complex approach to sustainable agricultural productivity growth. It recognizes agriculture as part of larger socio and ecological systems and seeks to align productivity growth with resilience, equity, and environmental sustainability. The GAP Index was established with the birth of the GAP Report in 2010 to track changes in TFP growth and illustrate the future growth necessary, holding resources and inputs constant, to sustainably fulfill global needs for agricultural products by 2050. The GAP Index target at the time was a projected rate of 1.7% average annual TFP growth during 2010 to 2050. That's the solid green line on this chart. To estimate the GAP Index, we make two key assumptions. One, that agricultural production would need to double between 2010 and 2050 to meet growing demand. And second, all output growth should come from TFP growth to meet our global environmental goals. However, at only 0.76% annually, the global average annual TFP growth during 2014 to 23, that's the orange line, fell well below the GAP Index target of 1.7% annual growth. Extrapolating the current line through 2050, the orange dashed line shows that we will fall far below the TFP growth needed to sustainably supply demand for agricultural products unless we change course quickly. Because of lagging TFP growth, the GAP index target now has been moved upward to 2% annual TFP growth that we need to achieve between now and 2050 to sustainably supply agricultural needs, or needs for agricultural products. We're at about 1/3 now of the TFP growth rate that we need. During 2014 to 23, Asia emerged as a global leader, especially countries in the Northeast and South, including China and India. Across most of the rest of the globe, however, including sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, and especially North America, we have seen a lag in TFP growth, and North America actually negative TFP growth during the past decade. I'd like to make sure that you all know what the GAP initiative at Virginia Tech is. If you're not familiar with us, we are focused on the urgent need to sustainably increase agricultural productivity for enhancing food and nutrition security, enhancing rural livelihoods, and environmental protection. And the heart of the GAP initiative is our annual GAP report. The GAP report and initiative would not be possible without the help of our supporting research and technical partners. Our supporting partners provide financial support and perspectives on critical issues facing the world's agricultural systems. The GAP initiative and report supporting partners and accelerators are Bayer, Corteva, John Deere, the Mosaic Company, the Oyster Institute, Syngenta, and the Virginia Tech College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Our technical and research partners provide insights into many areas essential for productivity growth and collaborations for research and impact. Quite a few of our partners are in the room, and I want to extend an especially warm welcome to all of you. Now let's return to our TFP story. The 2025 GAP report includes an analysis of TFP trends in the United States. Two data sets provide insights into U.S. TFP growth. The USDA National Agricultural Productivity Accounts generates a finely tuned measure of on-farm technical change and resource use efficiency. The second data set, the International Agricultural Productivity Data Set, harmonizes data across countries, making it possible to benchmark U.S. performance within a global context. This chart illustrates the sources of U.S. agricultural output growth from the national accounts, that's the bars, and compares them with the TFP growth rates from the international data set, that is the purple line, revealing how TFP growth has evolved within the United States and how it compares to global trends. Both data sets, even though the numbers are not the same, they both show a clear trend of declining TFP growth in the United States. The consequences of this productivity plateau are far-reaching. Sluggish growth undermines U.S. competitiveness in the global agricultural trade market, squeezes farm profitability, and pressures rural livelihoods. Slower U.S. TFP growth can affect both American economic interests and international food security. So why is U.S. TFP growth stagnating? From pioneering hybrid crops and transgenic varieties to scaling digital agriculture and precision technologies, the U.S. has been a frontier leader for a long time, expanding its own productivity base while contributing to the global TFP growth frontier through scientific excellence, private sector innovation, technology transfer, and global knowledge diffusion. Yet despite this innovation track record, TFP growth has essentially ceased in the United States. The TFP growth frontier model highlights four underlying causes of this productivity plateau and what can be done to address them. First, we are seeing diminishing returns from early-stage domain tools. Revolutionary innovations, such as hybrid maize and the first GMO crops introduced during the 1990s, are now almost universally adopted in the United States. They continue to perform, but are no longer contributing to TFP growth. Second, we see limited adoption of later stage domain tools. For example, most precision agriculture innovations, even 20 to 25 years on, are still at less than 50% adoption across U.S. agriculture. Third, frictions that limit the expansion of existing domain frontiers. Between 2002 and 2021, U.S. public agricultural R&D expenditures, adjusted for inflation, fell by almost 30%. And finally, there are barriers that impede transition to the next domain, that is systems intensification. U.S. transition to this domain largely remains stuck at the pilot stage. Despite their promise, innovations such as integrated crop livestock systems, circular nutrient flows, and ecosystem service markets face high barriers to adoption. In the 2025 GAP report, we discuss 4 ways to reinvigorate TFP growth in the United States. First, reignite public R&D investment. Second, close the adoption gap for current innovations. Third, strengthen the regulatory environment. And fourth, foster public-private collaboration. Now, applied globally, the TFP growth frontier model reveals 4 ways to reinvigorate global productivity growth in agriculture. First, we can upscale adoption of a domain's productivity-enhancing tools through high-impact bundles, as we discussed in the 2024 GAP report. Second, push the domain outward through research and development. When an early stage frontier matures, that is, when adoption nears saturation and TFP growth slows, new scientific insights and advanced techniques can push that frontier outward, creating fresh opportunities for productivity gains, as shown by the dotted pink line on this chart. Third, transition to the next domain frontier. And fourth, leap directly to later stage domain frontiers. Some developing agricultural economies are poised to make this leap. Now, we're not suggesting that it's possible to bypass the adoption of fundamental tools to advance TFP, including fertilizers and amendments to improve fertility, mechanization, improved genetics, appropriate crop protection tools, and veterinary services for livestock, among other examples. For example, fertilizer use in sub-Saharan Africa still remains at about 20 kilograms of NPK per hectare, which is far too low. But we are suggesting that coupling these foundational tools with technologies from later stage domains, including digital tools, can drive rapid and transformative growth in agricultural productivity. The TFP growth frontier model will offer decision makers and investors a strategic lens for portfolio diversification and differentiation. By mapping opportunities along these domains, capital and policy can be directed toward emerging technologies, scalable interventions, and market segments best positioned to drive sustainable TFP growth. The TFP growth frontier is more than a conceptual model. It is a call to action. With deliberate, evidence-based investment in innovation, adoption, and integration, agriculture can unlock the next era of productivity growth, one that delivers resilience, equity, and sustainability alongside efficiency. The choices made today by governments, industry leaders, researchers, and producers will determine whether agricultural systems can rise to meet the challenges of tomorrow. I thank you for your attention, and now I am pleased to invite my colleague, Jessica Agnew, who is the managing editor of the GAP report and helps me to lead the GAP initiative at Virginia Tech, to moderate and introduce our panel.
Wonderful, thank you. I would invite the panelists to come join me on stage as well, and would invite someone at the back to change this to the Mentimeter. Wonderful. Well, great to see you all this afternoon. As Tom mentioned, do we have Emmanuel in the house? Oh, here he's coming. Welcome. So yeah, my name is Jess Agnew, and I helped to write the GAP report this year and help to lead our broader work, really thinking about how we can meet the rising demands on our agricultural system. So we are at the World Food Prize, but it's worth noting that agriculture also produces more than just food and also provides livelihoods to many of our farmers. So if we're going to meet this rising demand, all while restoring resilience to our food and agri-food systems, we need more than incremental change. It's going to require coordinated, scalable strategies that position agriculture as a potential solution. So we really believe at the GAP Initiative that sustainable agricultural productivity growth is one of the most compelling strategies that we have in our toolbox. Achieving this, however, really depends on aligning innovation with investment frameworks and supportive policy mechanisms. So they really are the three legs of a strong stool. So in this panel discussion, we're going to adopt the theme of the World Food Prize Borlaug Dialogue this year in going to the soils. So thinking about how productivity growth can accelerate at the water-soil carbon nexus. So as farms build soil organic carbon, water and nutrients are retained, and water is used more productively. Methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide emissions are also reduced, all while, hopefully, not sacrificing yields. So to unpack what this looks like in practice, we're joined by an amazing cross-sectoral panel featuring experts from the Mosaic Company, Syngenta Group, SAS Crops, the African Agricultural Technology Foundation, and Nuveen Natural Capital. I'm really excited about this panel. This is a really great group of folks. But you are also experts in your own right, in your own organizations, and from your experience and work with farmers and within agriculture. So we're going to actually invite you to also share your thoughts. Where I'm going to ask each panelist 2 questions, and I'm going to also open up one of those questions to you. So this is the one time you can have your phones out, if in case, I know they've been in your bag this whole time. Nobody's checked their email, but now I would invite you to get your phones out. You'll be able to join the Mentimeter using a QR code, or if you're familiar with the Mentimeter website, there will be the code there at the top you can join. So I'm going to start with Adam. Adam is a sustainability agronomist at the Mosaic Company. He leads strategic partnerships in nutrient stewardship and provides critical expertise on carbon and water quality in sustainable agriculture. So Adam, you recently told me about some research that came out of South Dakota State University on this relationship between soil organic matter and productivity growth. So can you tell us a little bit more about the findings of that research, just to set the scene for our discussion today?
Yeah, certainly, Jess. Yeah, so the study that she's talking about was actually published this year by South Dakota State University. Dr. David Clay, if folks know him. I used to work with him very closely when I used to live in South Dakota. But what they did is they looked at a 21-year period in 4 states in the upper Midwest, so Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, and South Dakota. And they examined 12 million soil samples taken across the 4 states, and also collaborated with the farmers where those soil samples were taken from. They used machine learning and modeling to look at, if certain practices continue, where is soil organic carbon going to be in the future, and actually how much carbon is sequestered in those soils. But just looking at the 21-year period, what they looked at was tillage intensity and reduction in tillage, and then also looked at yield potential and productivity. So one of the things I hear frequently around sustainability, regenerative ag, pick your buzzword of the day. There seems to be a lack of productivity talked about that. And so when working with farmers, they're paid by the bushel. And so it's critically important, especially in today's environment. We got to squeeze out as many bushels per acre as we possibly can. And so what this study looked at is, as we're transitioning here in the United States to no-till, reduced tillage, you see an increase of cover crops, even in the state of Iowa here. I don't know correctly off the top of my head how many cover crop acres are here, but it's surging, right? We're seeing a dramatic increase in the use of that practice. But what they found in the study was over the 21-year period where farmers are transitioning to no-till or reduced tillage, they actually saw an increase in corn and soybean yields by 63% and 33% over that 21-year period. They also saw an increase of soil organic carbon by 33% across all 4 states. And they only looked at the surface soil sampling. So one of the things about the study and the caveat behind it is, well, how much of that carbon is actually sequestered even deeper into the soil profile? Because we know that's critically important. And we know, Dr. Rattan Lal and the work that he does is critically important. So the other thing that came out of it was not only the soil organic carbon potential increase, but that actually translated to 1.24 billion metric tons of carbon across the 4 states. It's a big number. And so when we think about sustainability, regenerative ag, soil health, and sometimes these practices will have a yield drag on productivity, over time, as long as we continue to stay focused and moving forward, we can actually see productivity gains in yields. And I think what I get excited about in this space is, companies like Mosaic and others are actually looking at various strategies of how do we look at the soil profile, right? Most of what we work on is crop inputs. We're looking above ground. We're looking at yield. But it's an exciting space now where we're just scratching the surface of the soil. So, Mosaic, we have biological products that we're coming out with to really harness and look at nutrient use efficiency.
That's a great segue to the next question, and I'll ask Christina to change the slide here. So can you tell us a little bit more about what Mosaic is doing with growers? And from the audience, please contribute, maybe from your own organizations, how we're supporting farmers to adopt field-level solutions and management practices that are going to improve soil health.
Yeah, so Mosaic's an interesting company. We're a wholesaler, so we sell to ag retail here in North America. So there's a big disconnect between how our products are used with the actual end user, the farmer. And so a lot of the work that I do, we fund 25 projects in North America through the grant funding, which we use as a tool to actually work with farmers and help them address responsible fertilizer use. And mainly, I'm really focused on water quality from that standpoint, and now soil health, right, from a productivity standpoint. So some of the ways that we're looking at, the tools that we work with farmers is really around nutrient use efficiency. So how can we leverage that major investment of fertilizer on the field for optimal crop uptake? And at the same time, we can minimize how much is being lost from the field. And, fertilizer doesn't get talked about a lot at the World Food Prize, but a really important stat is 40 to 60% of crop yields globally is attributed to fertilizer. So it's a very key input that we need to use with farmers. And as we think about fertilizer use in other regions around the world, it's critically important to make sure we have access.
All right, well, let's see what the audience says. Christina, if you might reveal the audience contributions, and I'll see how good my eyesight is. Okay, so financing is a great point about how on that adoption piece. So Adam, is there anything Mosaic is thinking about right now in terms of financing, or how do you help farmers afford what's going into their fields?
Yeah, that's a challenging question.
These are going to be the hot take questions.
These
yeah,
are the hot takes. All right. Well, mostly through our grant funding that I manage, we leverage it with USDA, NRCS cost share, and so it's a means to help the farmer with the amount of money that they have to put in to get some of the cost share programs and put these practices on the ground. Mm-hmm. The financing piece is very challenging. We've had a lot of conversations with financial institutions around the world. And I think one of the biggest things there is, those institutions are looking for somebody to take the risk and the liability off of it. But I think there's a surge happening of these conversations going on where we may be able to help farmers actually have lower interest rates if we can document and validate and prove that their system from a holistic standpoint is moving in a sustainable or stewardship direction, right? And if we can prove that, this is going to be lasting for future generations, we might be able to see that nut to crack. But I know there's another person on the panel that's going to talk about economics.
No, I think it's a great point into the systems integration domain, right? That we just heard Tom talk about. Is if we have those MRV systems, monitoring, reporting, and verification systems well established with strong science, that can then tie into the innovations that Mosaic is investing in so that there is a return on investment for you all, making sure there's a private sector incentive, but ultimately having it translated into return on investment for farmers, both in terms of soil health, yields, and profitability. All right, so I think some people have voted. Let's see in the room. I'm going to have to turn because I can't.
That was my grade.
Yeah. Okay, so in the room, we are the sort of most popular suggestion is we need to go where the farmers are and do demonstrations. Definitely farmers like to see the results rather than reading the theory or seeing the numbers. So I think we all know farmers very well to know that seeing is believing. Okay, this experiment of a participatory panel, I think we're doing very well. So thank you all. Thank you, Adam, for being the first one. Okay, I'm going to now go to Jeremy Grotecki. He's the global head of IT and digital strategy at Syngenta. Jeremy pioneers AI-driven solutions in precision agriculture in this role, and his work integrating data science with practical farming applications is helping to shape the future of sustainable food production. So, Jeremy, as a crop protection and seeds company, can you tell us a little bit about what Syngenta is doing, approaching those R&D investments to push out those domain frontiers for efficiency optimization and systems integration?
Yep, no, great to be here, everybody. So yeah, just briefly, Syngenta obviously is an input provider, crop protection, biologicals, genetics, and technology. So I think Tom laid out a lot of great points earlier on the presentation. One of the factors is the regulatory framework and how do we get technology distributed around the world very well. And so what I would call this is a path to innovation. How do you unblock everybody from large majors to small startups or small business to get path of innovation to technologies to growers? And so one of the things we have to be looking at is really lifting that. And so we have several technologies coming to market. One is a Timerium. It helps control nematodes and Fusarium disease. But we're going around kind of country by country from a deployment because of the regulatory framework that varies. And so it's actually launched in Brazil first, then comes to the US just because of the regulatory frameworks. And so you can't distribute the technology at scale, at speed to the growers' needs around the world because of that broken regulatory frameworks that are around the world. And so that's one piece of that. Same thing as a new herbicide we've got coming up. We've got resistance coming in clethodim down in the Argentina markets. And so we're able to go into there with a new herbicide technology. But again, it's country by country, and it delays that ability for growers to grow their productivity factor as a resistance come in and the new technology comes into play. The same thing in the traits side of that. We've got stuff in the pipeline in 2035, like that could help growers today, but that's such a long time frame to bring to market. We're not only alone in this, right? Pretty much everybody has this problem. And so I think it's a really good call out by the report that we've got to work this to move innovation out to the grower at a faster pace to meet the challenges that we go. I think if you look at the report too, and law of averages it's a great report for baselining, but law of averages, there's a study I read that the Air Force measured every pilot, arm length, height, weight, everything to build the perfect cockpit for the pilot to sit in. They used the average number of every pilot, though, and then no pilot actually fit into the seat. And so this is, I think, a very fundamental thing that happens. And so we've got to make sure that we can pull apart, how is corn production doing, how is soybeans, wheat, cattle, et cetera, and be able to move some of these factors up and down. So it's a great baseline and a point to start, but we want to make sure we look at that. I mean, you can look at U.S. corn and soybean production. Pick on the NCGA growers. Those guys are averaging 350, 380 bushel per corn, but the average grower is about 186 on the U.S. national average. There's a huge discrepancy, and that's the same tech, the same information, but it's the distribution of it. There's a story out there, or a quote, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. And that's a very fundamental point that I think that we've got to think through. So that path to innovation is a key component. And ultimately, and I think people in that last poll mentioned it, it's the last mile. And so how do you work with growers to deploy that technology? And that last mile, whether it's a retail or a distributor or a local agency model, however that is, it's such a key impactor for scale in the grower world. And it doesn't matter if you're in India or Brazil or Argentina. As an example, on our China market, we have a route to market that we call MAP, or Modern Agricultural Platform. At the end of the day, it's a storefront for farmers to come in and get fertilizer, seeds, crop protection, and technology, and help them use that, educate, train, and deploy. It's one of the fastest growing components, especially where you have lots of farmers and you have a lot of variability from crops and inputs. And so last mile from a distribution, the regulatory framework that slows down that deployment are key factors to really grow the productivity areas.
Well, I think it's something we hear often about getting every tool to every farmer, which is the theme of our report last year, is that regulatory environment. And especially with public ag R&D investments going down, a lot of that falling to the private sector, there's a lot of expectations on the private sector, but then if it is not cost effective or incredibly expensive to get these tools that address some of the public's concerns around environmental interactions, it's putting a huge burden onto private sector, which, at the GAP initiative, we really advocate for the field solutions, but alongside policy and regulatory reforms. So you touched a little bit on this in your first question, and invite Christina to go to the next. So to you and to the room, how might we close some of this adoption gap for more of these more advanced technologies, and maybe even thinking at all scales of production? So from the small scale farmer to large scale farmers, and making it more accessible to engage in precision agriculture globally.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to hear what the audience has to say. But I think, so I was actually on a call this morning with a Ukrainian farmer. They farm about 120,000 hectares in the Ukraine market. And we're talking about precision ag and adoption of fertility in nature. And they're roughly 40% of that acreage they can use technology on, variable rate technologies. 40% they just physically can't. The equipment isn't set up, ready to go. Education of the staff that needs to operate it. And then they got about 20% of the acres that there's little things, unlock codes, drop GPS signal, which it's always fun to talk to the Ukrainian farmers because the problems they face today are much different than anything else in the world. He's like, you're on the VRA machine because the GPS jamming signals of the war are affecting the machine to do it. So talk about adoption at the last mile in challenges that growers face around the world. But fundamentally, that grower is an advanced grower, but he's still at only about 40-some% of his ability to use the technology on his farm. And I think the finance question, access to capital, right? Ag is a long cycle. It takes time to upgrade equipment, turn it over, and adopt that. And so access to capital on the digital side is a big piece of this to help with that adoption and the education. Now go to the other side of the world and continents, the south side. In the Brazil market, working with another large grower down there that farms about 300,000 to 400,000 hectares, they put targets on their regional farms to reduce input efficiencies based on the technology being adopted. So they're buying, see and spray machines to reduce input costs, and they put, if you're going to invest $1 on the hardware and software, you've got to take it out on the inputs and optimize. And that's really what we're trying to do in the TFP is, reduce inputs and maximize outputs. And so there's a grower there doing the exact thing that you're trying to get after. And so the one paintbrush I get worried about sometimes is we try to paint every grower around the world the same. And I'll go to India as my last example. That's where it's simply, can the grower take a picture of the plant and it tells them it's a virus or bacterial and what fungicide or insecticide to play. And so that education of what to do and do that with 100 million growers. Right. And so you really got to be careful about painting a brush across all of them for technology adoption. But the key is really bringing forward the value to the grower at the last mile and in their field. Easier said than done, I'll fully admit. But I think one technology, and it's all the hype, AI, right? Can't go to something without somebody saying this term. But if I go back to when I was in grad school, I learned, agronomy, I learned soils, I learned irrigation, I learned plant physiology, insects, all individual domain disciplines. And then I learned what they look like, so I went to be a crop scout. I used my perception technologies to walk and see the insect or see the disease, fill out the soil moisture to determine how much water there is, and then consumed all that together in my head from my studies. Well, that's fundamentally what we can do with AI now and the large foundation models and computer vision models at scale. Unfortunately, up to this point, we've had to do all these problems in single domains. I gave you a irrigation prescription, I gave you a herbicide prescription, and they were so basic and simple. Well, as we go forward and you think about the plateaus, how do we push on into the systems integration? I do see AI as helping us with that and seeing across the domains. Ag is highly dependent on each other. If it rains, my nitrogen leaches. If it's dry, I produce nitrogen. You've got to be able to account for those factors in the environment, and that's really where I see AI coming as we move in these advanced ecosystems.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the integrated pest management, but now we can do it across all the different components. So, all right, let's see how the audience voted. What do we have coming out? So, we need to dial back on capitalism. That's very interesting. All right. I would love to know more about how that's going to help farmers access advanced tools, but open for new perspectives. Data governance equipment is definitely very interesting in thinking about how AI, I think, making sure that farmers continue to own their data. And then this last one is interesting. Language is everything. Avoidance of overly technical language that prevents new tech from being thoroughly understood. So we're thinking about bringing farmers along in the advancement of this journey and making sure they understand these more advanced technologies as we grow. Okay, I'm going to come now to Tracy, who represents a large number of farmers in Canada. Tracy Broughton is the executive director of Sask Oilseeds, which represents more than 20,000 growers across Saskatchewan. There will be a test later to see if you can pronounce this lovely province's name. Tracy's passion for bridging the rural-urban divide through better communication makes her a powerful advocate for modern agriculture. And she's going to start by telling us a little bit about the Canadian farmer journey, and specifically in Western Canada on the no-till revolution, so taking these new practices to growers.
Thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk about the no-till revolution in Saskatchewan, and I come from Manitoba, actually. So I didn't live through this, but it was happening as I was growing up. I grew up in the black soil zone, so it was a little bit more difficult for farmers in Manitoba to get their head wrapped around it. But in Saskatchewan in the 80s, it was quite dry, and farmers were using summer fallow every other year, every second or third year. And basically their fields were blowing around. And so that was the case of farmers having to adopt a new practice and change their mindset because they were forced to. Like, sustainability at that time was saving their soil so that they could actually grow the next crop. And as I understand it, having friends now who were part of moving that new agronomic practice forward, there was a group of agronomists that literally went out to small towns and had like coffee shop talks, brought people together, brought farmers together, and they talked about how they could modify their equipment, what sorts of different crops they could grow. The provincial government actually started a lentil and pea breeding program so that they could expand the different crop types beyond barley and wheat. And it ended up in this whole like transformational journey for our province. We have equipment that manufacturers that have their head offices and manufacturing right in Saskatchewan, and we're a province of 1 million people. Like, it's not a very big place. It's not a very highly populated place. There was also a lot of, like in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, it's a bit of a microcosm of our agricultural university and the National Research Council. And so scientists at the university and the federal government were working together to change the rapeseed profile so that it could be a crop that was okay for human consumption, and it was a relatively easy crop to work with, so it got the attention of the private sector, and we started having private sector involvement in crop breeding, and that was pretty unusual in Canada, and in fact most of the variety development is done in the public sector, which I think we could find a way to change that. It would probably be helpful for all farmers. In terms of new varieties. And so canola had a wonderful opportunity to be genetically modified for herbicide tolerance. And it just kind of all happened at the right time, where that was a crop that could be brought into the rotation and help farmers adopt zero-till very quickly. It was funny, last night I was talking to somebody who was kind of questioning GMOs, and I was thinking in my hotel room, wow, maybe we should have found like the reasons why consumers would appreciate GMOs before we started bringing GMOs that were going to help farmers. But when I think about what we're talking today, farmers wouldn't have adopted it if it didn't benefit them on their farms. And so I feel like getting back to the topic that we're here to talk about today, there needs to be something in it for the farmers. They need to be a part of the discussion and a part of the adoption. And one of the challenges when we've been having the sustainability conversation in Canada over the last number of years, it's been feeling like it's kind of shoved down farmers' throats from an environmental landscape. But the reality is the sustainability story in Saskatchewan was all about reduced tillage to help save the soil, which is part of the environment and the foundation of a farmer's farm.
Yeah, I mean, I think you brilliantly illustrated how science and research needs to come in both from public and private sector. The farmers need to be involved in the discussion around how do you modify, how do you make this work on your farm, but the science needed to be there so that they had the seed varieties, and then that full pull through to the consumer. As a value chain nerd, I'm always thinking about what that pull through is, right? And I think there's a sentiment maybe that consumers care about sustainability and soil health, but I just actually heard on the news this morning the rapidly escalating food price crisis in Canada, and I think very quickly you're going to see consumers doing away with any kind of willingness to pay on soil health. So it needs to make sense for the farmer and making sure that profitability is there at the end of the day. So I'll ask Christine to go to the next slide, and let's maybe dive into this a little bit further on how institutional partnerships and relationships can help to push out these productivity limits, helping us to manage that soil, carbon, water nexus, so that we don't run up against these productivity and even profitability limits, but then also thinking about how we do that in a producer-centric way.
We were talking yesterday about some of these conferences bringing everybody together, and there's like a cost of carbon, there's a high cost to that. But at the end of the day, if we want science to be adopted on farm, we need to bring farmers into the conversation really early so they can help give feedback directly to scientists about what is practical or not practical. We have conversations around, we have a research committee made up of like half of our board of directors. They review research proposals with the help of scientists, but it's farmer directors who are trying to identify, like what's going to benefit us in 15 to 20 years and what should we be investing our dollars in. And we always have this conversation about like, well, what is, like, should we be developing priorities so the scientists are like really focusing what their applications are, like what area they want to work on, or should we just see what comes in because farmers aren't scientists and they don't know what they don't know. That's always what the end of that conversation is. But I guess at the end of the day, the reason why we're so interested in the GAP report is I think we have to kind of do both. Like we have to say, here's what the practical problems are on the farm and what are solutions that we've never thought of that can help bridge that gap. But yeah, it's all about having a conversation, I guess.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's see. Oh, man, my eyesight is going. Okay, so extension work is the key, and actually, very interestingly, so I'm Canadian as well, and when I moved to the US, I learned a lot about the cooperative extension model and more and more in my work understanding these different models of extension. Oh, could we go back? This idea about how contributors and collaborators are compensated for their time is a very interesting one. And I think it would be amazing to discover new models because, if I go out to this meeting, I'm compensated for my time. But if we're asking farmers to come meet, share their perspectives, their insights that help private sector, create more returns on investment, even researchers do better research projects, but are they compensated for their time in as direct way as those who are gleaning the information from them? Let's see, anything else we have here? In speaking about the land grant model, the cooperative extension, this idea that we're connected with the farmers and that goes back into the research infrastructure, I think is, something that we really need to make sure is functional. Okay, I'm going to go now to Emmanuel O'Cogbenin. He's the Director for Program Development and Commercialization at the African Agricultural Technology Foundation based in Kenya. So I thought this question is also good for the audience. So could you just share a little bit with us about the public-private partnerships that are facilitating technology transfer to make sure that African smallholder farmers are able to leapfrog to later stage domains getting access to those advanced technologies?
Yeah. Thank you again for the invitation. And I think the key word there is smallholder producers. And that means we need to really think to develop models that can help them move. And then you also need to understand that most of these smallholder farmers had operated from subsistence level. And if you're going to transfer technology that is going to excite them, then you need to move them out of that confinement in subsistence agriculture to commercial agriculture. Otherwise, why would they want to adopt your technology? Because it's not seen as real agriculture. They don't see themselves making good livelihoods from agriculture. They're just trying to supplement funds they have. But we want to change that, and that's why in AATF we say you can be prosperous through adoption of technologies. So we need to speak to that theme to say you can find quality life by engaging in agriculture. and we need to deliver that. But as you know, a lot of investment has gone into research, and a number of them end up on the shelves. And that's because the model adopted wasn't addressing the needs of farmers. Of course, you know, when you look at the yield levels globally, if you see the charts shown earlier, Africa was always at the bottom. So a lot of things need to change. It's like trying to find your way in the big expanse of field where a lot of things are happening at a fast rate. And so your technology transfer will work not just because you have a technology. You need to start engaging the farmers much earlier, like she said. So you start working with them much before the technology is ready. And you can't leapfrog to late stage domains when things are not properly functioning well. It's always been on extensification. You need more food, you have to open up more lands. And you are not bringing efficiency, you are not, it's just not working from the economic point of view. The finance, the economics are not there. And this is the major problem. Now, what have we done basically? We start that process by doing what I call co-creation workshops with the farmers. We get to understand what do they want and how. Most of the times, scientists have a way of thinking they can develop solutions for the farmers without the farmers. It just doesn't work. You can't imagine how they design how they want to evolve, and you need to create room for that. So that is just what is there. And then we know they may not understand all the aspects of the science, like we're talking about biotechnology, but they do come with very interesting questions. And we also try to bring in the elements of business, because that's where the attraction will come in. So you need them to support your technology transfer models. And once that understanding is there, it's faster. The other thing is, what are the drivers for that technology transfer? We want to make sure that the technology we send to them addresses their needs. 2, it's affordable. 3, it's scalable. All right? And of course, the other elements to say it is sustainable. So these are some of the things we do. And we also realize that the public sector is not well framed to support that extensively. So a lot of things has changed over time. I don't know why, but we know that in the past, we used to have very effective extension systems. Right now, you can't even find extension officers to work with farmers. Technologies are evolving rapidly, faster. And so we can't basically transfer the model you have in the West to Africa immediately. And so these are some of the challenges we have. Of course, new paradigms are coming up right now. You can actually commercialize extension. If you find value, you need to look for somebody to help you. So those things are coming up. Digital tools are becoming very great. But then you just spoke about the soil health. That is another huge problem. I was in a meeting at the ACAT meeting in Africa, and then they showed the world map, and we're trying to find places where you have data. When you look at the US, dense. You look at Europe, dense. But you look at Africa, the dots are not connecting. So how are you going to transfer technology in a way that the farmer will have some confidence in that? So we're dealing with a lot of things, but leapfrogging to later stage domains probably will work with countries that are now opening up to great technologies like Nigeria, Kenya, those mid-income countries by African standard. That's possible, but a lot of countries are still behind relatively, and I think it's better you start working with them based on what you have.
So the regulatory environment, but also I thought the point you made was really interesting on making sure that the producers also support the model to take it to scale. We're running a bit short on time. This is the challenge when everybody is so interesting. So I'm gonna take it to Christian Mann now, who's the Director of Sustainability for row crops at Nuveen Natural Capital. With experience spanning USDA, global food security policy, and grassroots food systems work, Christian brings a unique perspective on agriculture's role in our communities and what it means for investment and an investment company to be working directly with producers. So if we zoom out now from the African context, the Canadian context, to institutional grade investments. So those are things like hedge funds, pension funds, kind of moving away from venture capital. But these institution grade investments, what's most exciting to investors right now on the regenerative space and soil health?
Okay, this is going to take 30 seconds because I think we're out of time. Let me say two things just as we wrap up here, and thanks to all these guys for really great comments, and gals. Yeah. Folks, I think we all know this. I hope we all know this. It is super tough out there right now. There are a lot of farmers for whom this will be their last season farming, at least in the context of U.S. agriculture. Price indices are down 50% from what they were a couple years ago. Costs are up 20% from the 10-year average. So I think sometimes sustainability is about what the word originally means, which is surviving. It's sad to say it, but I think we need to remember that. Let me just close with one quick story about something we're excited about. We're in the middle of our second season trialing in-field soil and moisture sensors with a company out of the West Coast. Our team was actually pretty skeptical about these devices. It feels like a solution in search of a problem. It felt like not technology that the farmer asked for, something that we were talking about today. Our tenant saved tens of thousands of gallons of water and tens of thousands of dollars by using this technology. And that is something that matters in this season, that makes a material difference for the bottom line. I love conversations about soil health and where we might go, but as managers of institutional capital, we need technologies that matter right away to a farmer's bottom line. So that's what we're focused on. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Maybe I'll just ask you to say one quick comment on our way out here about what the constraints are that may kind of come top of mind in terms of attracting new investment to the space right now through institutional grade investments.
One more quick story. We had an investor visit us from a Scandinavian country a few months ago, and the questions that he was asking about, why aren't these fields, why aren't there more crops in rotation here? Why don't we have more wildlife? All pretty valid questions. You could see where they would come from. But when the tenant that we were visiting walked him through some of the economic situations, it was like scales had fallen off his eyes, and he realized, wow, that's actually pretty tough to do. So I actually think our relationships with our investors, helping them understand just how tough it is right now, that is itself a structural issue that we are trying to approach through relationships with our investors.
That is a fantastic story to end on, just balancing the idealism with the pragmatism for the farmer in all that we ask them to do. Thank you all so much for sticking with us to the end. I've been avoiding eye contact. I don't know who the organizer is in the room, but I think we sort of snuck it in under the wire. Thank you all so much for coming. It was so lovely to have you. We're available for questions, and thank you so much.